welcome to the Wildline Podcast. I'm your host, Dan. This is a podcast about movies and how much money they make at the box office. Today is a special episode. It's going to be the summer review show for the summer of 2019 box office. We're going to walk through sort of the top films, what happened each month, kind of high level. We're not going to do deep dives on too many films, but we will touch upon a lot of films that came out this summer, all the winners, some of the losers, and then we'll talk about what happened sort of holistically from a super high level, how this summer was compared to other summers over the last decade or so, and what that means for the box office and the movie exhibition business at large. It was a strange summer. So when this summer started, I did a summer preview show, and I sort of walked through what was going to happen. And it really seemed like there was this throwback situation happening. Well, first of all, you had the start of summer moved up a week, essentially. Just like last year, Avengers Endgame really kicked off the summer at the end of July. So end of April. So the last week of April was when summer really kicked off this year and last year because of the Avengers. So it was a strange start to the summer, but once we got into June, it seemed like we had a really solid slate of films that were going to do well. Godzilla, Men in Black, Dark Phoenix. Well, we all thought that was going to flop, and it did. But Godzilla and Men in Black, Aladdin, John Wick 3, it felt like there was a very solid summer movie season ahead of us. So it seemed like if things got off to an explosive start like they did with Avengers Endgame, we would end up having a really strong summer. What ended up happening, though, was that Avengers, I think, astounded everybody with its performance. Ended up with $858 million domestically, only 2.7, almost 2.8 billion worldwide. It kind of blew everybody away. And essentially, this summer got off to a huge head start compared to other summers. So you would think that we would end up ahead, but what ended up happening is that this summer was right in line with the 10-year average, about $4.8 billion total for the whole summer. So despite that insane head start that we had, the rest of the summer just did not live up to expectations and actually fell way behind other summers. It was just because of Avengers Endgame that we ended up essentially even with the 10-year average for the summer box office. So what we're going to do is kind of just walk through quickly what happened, the big films that opened, starting with Avengers Endgame all the way through this weekend. I count this summer as like Endgame was week 17 of this year all the way through last weekend, which is week 34 technically. I'm getting very wonky. So that's what I'm counting as the summer. For all the numbers and the 10-year averages, I did go back and pull this information and adjust to inflation with the actual inflation rate, not like the average movie ticket, which is, I think, what Box Office Mojo does. I just wanted to be a little bit more accurate this time. And I think it makes for a better analysis and a better sort of more authenticity and transparency to what we're doing here, so that the data tells a more accurate story. So let's do this. So the summer kicked off here with Avengers Endgame, opened up on April 26th. It blew everybody away, right? Like no one expected it to open over $300 million, $350 million. I mean, that was insane. I thought it was going to open somewhere near what Infinity War did in the 260, 270 sort of situation, that ballpark. That didn't happen, right? It just blew past all expectations and really, got the summer off to a supernova explosive start. And to sort of illustrate that, if you look at that week, which is week 17 of the year, technically, if you look at that week this year compared to other weeks, the box office, the total box office for that week when Avengers Endgame kicked off the last week of April, all of the box office did over $500 million in the US and Canada, $536 million to be exact. The average for the last 9 to 10 years, technically, was $190 million. So off the bat, we're already up $346 million to start the summer. So the expectation there is that this, we can just cruise to like a $5 billion summer. Didn't happen. And we'll see why it didn't happen. So Avengers Endgame kicked everything off. Also in early May, we had Intruder, a small film from Sony Gem, did 35. That was a decent performance. Sony Gem is kind of similar to Blumhouse. It's way before Blumhouse, so kind of like proto Blumhouse. It's Sony's imprint for like thrillers, teen movies, horror, slasher stuff. And every once in a while they have a little bit of a winner. I think Intruder did okay. 35 is pretty good. Long Shot was a counter programming play. This is the Seth Rogen, Charlize Theron. I guess you'd call it a rom-com. It was so unfunny. I don't know how I sat through that. So that opens, it closed out at $30 million, which is pretty terrible. This is a Lionsgate film. There was a decent sized marketing budget to that one. A very strong counter programming play. Just did not connect with people. I think for a lot of reasons. I think the sort of not the super attractive guy getting a really attractive woman, that doesn't play anymore. Like that played 10 years ago, or I guess what are we talking about? Like 14 years ago, with like Knocked Up. I mean, there's a direct line between Knocked Up and that movie. And like, it didn't sit well with people. And then, the marketing wasn't great. It couldn't even tell what the movie was about. It just was I think a really botched job all the way from the start. I think the entire concept just didn't work. And audiences stayed away for $30 million. Ugly Dolls also opened up on May 3rd. So a lot of smaller films wanted to open up in the shadow of Avengers Endgame, and none of them did very well. The best of the lot was probably The Intruder. Then later in May 10th, we had Pokemon Detective Pikachu. That did 144 domestically. I think 430, I think, worldwide. This one I can't get. I've always seen this as kind of a failure because domestically 144 doesn't seem that strong to me at all. The worldwide total is okay. I thought the break-even point was 500 million, but Deadline saying it's kind of a win. I actually don't buy that. It just does not seem like a win to me. I think the production budget was too high, and I think the marketing budget was massive. I think at best it's kind of a break-even or maybe a small profit territory. I could be wrong, though. We'll see when the Deadline numbers come out early next year in 2020. They do the profitability sort of tournament to sort of match March Madness. So we'll see if Pokemon actually made a profit next year. I don't think that it did, or much of one. Also on May 10th, The Hustle. Oh God, what a disaster of a film. Anne Hathaway, Rebel Wilson. That movie was in the can for like a year, I think, and they just held on to it and threw it out here in the shadow of Avengers Endgame, and it's died on the vine, unexpectedly so. Also, this is from United Artists Releasing. Track that name because it's going to come back over and over again this summer with a lot of botched releases. Now, United Artists Releasing is a joint venture between Annapurna, which you've heard a lot of probably in the podcast, and MGM, obviously a huge old studio. The Annapurna part of that, Annapurna Studios is the brainchild of Megan Ellison. Megan Ellison is the daughter of Larry Ellison, who is the billionaire who helped start Oracle. So they have a lot of cash to run through. They're a very fascinating studio that are newer. They're an upstart, but they do have that Oracle billionaire cash to back them. What's interesting though, they've supported some wonderful movies. Like they co-financed Zero Dark 30 and like 100 other really interesting movies. Not 100, maybe like a dozen. I think they also co-produced Spring Breakers, which for that alone they deserve tons of praise. I love that movie. It's a classic. Modern day I call it the modern day Great Gatsby, but I've been shouted down when I say that. In any event, so Annapurna is an interesting kind of out there studio, weird origin to it. They've completely run out of money multiple times. I think they almost had a file for bankruptcy in the last couple of months, and they got bailed out. I don't know if they got bailed out, or Larry Ellison's got a blank checkbook that he can always write. So I think what's going to happen there is they're going to get some more cash infusion from Larry Ellison, the Oracle billionaire, and keep going. But the one thing they're not great at is releasing films, and The Hustle is perfect proof of that. And we'll talk a little bit later about Booksmart, and I think they also did the late night distribution, which is also a disaster. So they are kind of one of the sad cases of this summer. So The Hustle did not do very well, $35 million. I think very poor for Anne Hathaway and Rebel Wilson. Usually they can get a little bit more money for more people to show up for their movies, but that did not happen this time. Palms from SDX. So Ugly Dolls was an SDX film. So is Palms. Palms is a huge lost opportunity. $13 million total domestically. It should have opened at 13 and easily cruised to, I would say $40 million would be my expectation for this sort of film. look, it was plays to the older crowd, over 50 at least, over 65 would probably be your target demographic. It looked funny, good trailer. I believe Diane Keaton's in it. So I don't know what happened here. I think from what I remember, sort of reading the write-ups on this movie, they tried a smaller marketing campaign for this and it just didn't connect and there's no awareness. I bet you if you asked 1,000 people if they knew what Palms was the weekend it came out, maybe 5 people would say, yeah, I've heard of that film. So they really screwed up the marketing on that one. That's why it only did 13 million. As you can see, nothing really doing all that well after Avengers until you get to John Wick Chapter 3 on May 17th. And John Wick, I could talk about John Wick for a long time, essentially started out as kind of half of a hit, not really. Did okay the first one, but it really had a second life on VOD and streaming. And when it premiered at HBO, I remember that. People were all about it. So they decided to make a second one. That did fantastic. And this one's done so much better than either of those. So we're definitely going to see another John Wick. It's a big win this summer for Keanu Reeves, who is now like super ascendant. Like the new Matrix was just announced this week. So a lot of that has to do with the success of John Wick and specifically John Wick 3. He's a bankable star now. That wasn't the case maybe 5-10 years ago. So John Wick did 170 domestically over this summer, opening on May 17th. Also, A Dog's Journey opened on May 17th and only did $22 million. I think that's kind of a been there, done that situation. People love dogs. I think they've seen that story 1,000 times. They didn't want to see it again, so that's why it only did 22. And then one of the bigger surprises opened up on May 24th. Aladdin, obviously from Disney, had a decent opening, but has had amazing legs this summer. And remember, there was a lot of skepticism with that film, me included. The Guy Ritchie situation hasn't had a hit in forever. The trailer looked kind of off. The early footage just didn't look good. The CGI looked smudged almost. The clip that they played like 2 weeks before release was terrible. But somehow, some way, this thing has legged it out to $353 million domestic. And I think internationally, it's just past $1 billion. Huge, not necessarily, if you asked me hypothetically, would an Aladdin live imagining do $1 billion? I would say, yeah. But then all the sort of baggage with this one, the Guy Ritchie and Will Smith and the footage that came out and the song that was released early on didn't sound great. I would have said, I don't think this is going to do very well. So it's very surprising that it did do 353 and $1 billion worldwide. But this is sort of the second chapter of the Disney rules the box office and rules the summer. 50% of the $4.8 billion this year were Disney films. And that's like amazing and maybe kind of troublesome, it feels. It's like a little concerning that they have that much of a monopoly over the box office. But Aladdin was a huge win for them. Not a big win. Also that weekend, the 24th, was Booksmart that opened up then. A wide release, again, United Artists releasing, Annapurna MGM, but mostly Annapurna distribution. Completely failed this film. So Booksmart was the directorial debut of Olivia Wilde, who's a great actress. This turned out to be kind of a home run on her first at bat. A really good movie. Decent marketing. Had a big, strong showing at South by Southwest, so there was tons of buzz about this film. I remember people were ecstatic on Twitter about it after seeing it for the first time at South by Southwest. So I thought this had a good chance of breaking out. I think what happened here was the classic platform or art house release versus wide release. Like, what's the strategy? They went with a traditional wide release for this, 2,500 theaters, which, a normal wide release is more like 3,500 and on up, or like 3,200 and on up. So it was a little bit of a smaller wide release, but it was a wide release nonetheless. A huge mistake. There wasn't enough awareness for this film. They did not put together a robust marketing campaign. It wasn't the quality of the marketing, it was more the quantity of it and how they were targeting people. There just wasn't awareness for it and people didn't show up. And by the time they figured out that the film was actually existed, it was out of theaters like 2 or 3 weeks later. And also, I think a huge mistake, and I've seen this before, and it's just, I don't understand the thought process behind this. So Booksmart in the United States was distributed as a wide release exhibition theatrical film. It played in the theater. That means there's a 90-day window. So from the day it first plays in theaters, it takes 90 days for that movie then to hit a VOD rental or electric sell-through, which is buying a digital copy. You own it. A 90-day window. That's pretty much set in stone. You've seen some fights with Netflix, especially about The Irishman. And they've worked around that with independent theaters, but AMC, Regal, Marcus, Cinemark, the big players in domestic distribution for films, or exhibition, I should say, movie theater business, they're not going to budge the 90-day window. That is their bread and butter. It's not going to happen. Independent theaters, Mark Cuban, I think, owns Landmark Theaters. I think that's what it's called, like independent theaters. They're willing to play ball with Netflix and break that 90-day window, but it's sort of like cutting off your nose to spite your face. Like, it's just not, or throwing the baby out with the bathwater might be a better idiom there. It doesn't make any sense to do that. Like, the livelihood of the theater is the exclusivity that you can see it in the theater and you can't see it at home. This is a problem because Booksmart, while it was an exhibition movie theater film here in the US and Canada, that was not the case in the rest of the world. I believe the same day it was playing in theaters, it was on Netflix in France. Well, what do you think happens? You know, like, the moment there's an HD copy streamed online, somebody rips it and it's up on every single streaming site out there. I could watch Booksmart the night it was coming out in the theater here in HD from the comfort of my home. So that's a huge mistake. Any company that does that, they don't understand the business. Maybe they understand the business. Maybe there's other things going on. I'm not an expert. I don't work in it. But I'm just telling you, as a sort of avid consumer, people are going to stream it online if there is a real HD copy with good audio. They are not going to pay $15 to go to the theater. That's just consumer behavior 101. If there's no barrier to entry to watch the film for free, like, they're going to watch it for free. I mean, the music industry sort of taught us that lesson over the last 20 years now. So, huge mistake there from United Artists Releasing to do that, or whoever was behind that decision. And I think a terrible marketing campaign. And the fact that they didn't platform the film. Platform release, again, is like an art house release. You usually start New York, Los Angeles. You play it at the Angelica in New York. You play it at the ArcLight in Los Angeles, and a couple of the theaters, IFC maybe, in New York. See how it does in those 4 to 5 theaters. If it does really well, then you sort of slowly roll it out. What's the movie that just came out? Brittany Runs a Marathon. That did very well in limited release. Now there's buzz. There's buzz everywhere about that film out of nowhere. And I had not even heard about it until it opened up, and it did like $35K per theater. That's what Booksmart needed. It needed that sort of, that slow simmer release. Like, put it on low simmer, put it on like 2 on your burner, 2 or 3. Let it sit there for a long time. It needs to cook for a long time until that buzz gets to a bubbling, boiling point where you can spread it out to sort of smaller cities or in the middle of America, Milwaukee and Omaha, San Antonio, Denver, or something like that, where it can play strong in those cities, and more specifically play strong not in the cosmopolitan center of that city, right? Not in the cultural center of the downtown artsy theater, but out in the suburbs, in the exurbs. That's where you need a film like this to play well, to make good money, and it just never happened. So they pushed it out wide to everybody at once, and it just didn't work. So it made $22 million total. This had the potential to make 50 on up. I think it should have made 50 on up. It's such a good movie. What a directorial debut for Olivia Wilde. But it died on the vine. That's essentially what happened because of a poor release strategy. Okay, let's keep this train moving. Also, that weekend this is the weekend of May 24th. You had Brightburn, another Sony Gem movie. Only did $17 million domestically. James Gunn produced it. It was like a superhero, but it's like a kid who's a superhero, but he's evil or something. I don't know. Well, it didn't matter because nobody saw the movie, and had a terrible cinema score from what I remember. I think like C something. It's just like a bad bet. It just didn't work out. $17 million total domestic. Then we had Godzilla King of Monsters come out on the 31st of May. This is a massive flop, maybe one of the biggest flops of the year. I think the expectation here was like it opens at 70, closes out at like 200, 240, somewhere in that range. It closed out at 110. I mean, this is a train wreck of epic proportions. This is the second Godzilla movie we've had in like the last 5 years. The first one was 2014. That one like started out really strong, and then it basically collapsed in subsequent weekends. I think because it was open on holiday weekend, I remember, and then there's a huge word of mouth problem with it because people were really excited to go see it. But the reaction to it was very negative, very, very negative. If you mention Godzilla to most people, even like film nerds, they're like, that movie sucked. I loved it. I don't think it's a good film. I love it for its like, it has amazing sequences in it. But the story is just total rubbish. And so I think that left a bad taste in people's mouth. And so they did not show up for the second one. It's a little bit confusing because it had a really massive marketing campaign. I thought it was a decent marketing campaign. I wasn't that interested in it, even though I loved the Godzilla 2014 movie. I think what was also kind of weird is they're trying to do the cinematic universe with, this is Warner Brothers, with King Kong, because we had the King Kong Skull movie. Was that last year maybe? Or maybe the year before. That's going to connect into this. There's supposed to be a Godzilla King Kong movie next March 2020, but this did so poorly that like that week they pushed it back. They're like, yeah, maybe it's not going to be this next spring 2020, maybe summer 2020. I think they need to reevaluate. This performance is absolutely terrible and a huge flop, and they're going to lose a ton of money on this. The question is, do you double down and triple down and go through the King Kong Godzilla movie? I think those characters are kind of just too old. I think younger people don't connect with them. They don't have this sort of awareness of those characters going all the way back to what, the 50s, I want to say, 1950s. It's just not there anymore. And I think King of Monsters didn't do well because people didn't like Godzilla 2014. The Kong movie was okay. It wasn't great. You know, you get burnt once or twice in this business and people are done. They don't want to have anything to do with you. And I think that's kind of what happened here. Also that weekend was Rocket Man. This one's a little bit unfortunate. It seems like it's a very good movie. This is from Paramount. Paramount was down 44% this year from last summer. That's insane. Terrible summer for them. I don't know. The read on this has been really negative on Deadline's write-up for the summer and from other places that I've seen. You know, $96 million to me is not terrible domestic for this type of film. I think what ended up happening is the Bohemian Rhapsody so overperformed. I think it did like $900 million worldwide. Like, what the flying fuck? That, I mean, for a movie that was like shot 90% by Bryan Singer, then he got replaced because of the sexual scandals that he was involved with. It won the best editing Oscar, even though it's a complete travesty of film editing. I mean, it's unwatchable essentially, but it still made $900 million. People, what can you say? I think what happened is that like a lot of people are viewing Rocket Man in that prism or through that lens of the performance of Bohemian Rhapsody. And I think on one hand, that makes sense. Okay, it's a musical biopic. I mean, they're both about homosexual men as well. One thing, the Bohemian Rhapsody played down Freddie Mercury's homosexuality. Rocket Man does not play down Elton John's homosexuality. And that's sort of been one, I think, factor people have said that why it didn't do as well as Bohemian Rhapsody. I don't buy that shit for 1 second. I just don't. I think it's an excuse. I think what happened here, it's just a smaller film. $96 million for a musical biopic. To remove the context of Bohemian Rhapsody, that's a win. And so maybe they know something about Paramount and the marketing spend on this, but I think domestically at least, this is a good performance for Rocket Man. Also on the 31st of May was Ma. A really kind of surprising opening weekend, did very well, but had terrible legs because people didn't really like the movie. $45 million total. So kind of to recap, just to sort of take a step back a little bit, Avengers Endgame, starts the summer off with a grand slam. A couple of winners since then in May were, John Wick. Pokemon, I think, is kind of a push. Long Shot was a flop. Godzilla King of Monsters, a huge flop. Aladdin, a huge win. So Disney really owned the early part of the summer, and they're going to end up owning the end of the summer too. So we get into June of 2019. We're doing the box office here, summer review. Secret Life of Pets 2 underperforms from the original. This is from Universal animated film. The first one popped off massively. It wasn't a good film. I think this is similar to the Godzilla situation. The original pops off, does really well. The second one comes around. People are like, I didn't like the first one, so I'm not going to show up for the second one. I'm almost positive that's what happened with Life of Pets 2. Only did 157. It's just so clearly not top shelf animation. And storytelling. It's not Pixar. And everybody knows that. It's not Incredibles 2. It's Secret Life of Pets 2. So people were like, I'm not going to spend, $100 to take my entire family to see this. So they didn't show up. So 157, not a good performance. I don't think we're going to see a Secret Life of Pets 2. 3. I don't think it lost money necessarily, but that's not a good performance, especially compared to the first one. Also that first weekend in June was Dark Phoenix. What can we say about Dark Phoenix? So, take a step back and think about the comic book movie genre and sort of the phenomenon that we've been going through for the last 20 years. It was kicked off by X-Men in 2000. And the X-Men series, X2, X3, the Wolverine stuff, all the way through Logan, has been really kind of like a strong standby sort of pillar of the comic book movie genre. But in recent years, and I think we all sort of, Apocalypse was the canary in the coal mine. Everybody who follows this, who doesn't work at Fox, was basically like, this is disaster. Like, Apocalypse looked awful. The trailers were trash. It was a trash movie. Why would you triple down on that sort of path and do a movie like Dark Phoenix? It doesn't make any sense. I mean, it's a classic. I mean, the Harvard Business Review could do a case study on groupthink from the fact that Dark Phoenix even exists at Fox and who like pushed this movie and thought this was a good idea. $65 million total domestically. For a comic book movie, you need to open at 65, close out at 200, nothing below that. Like that's the barometer. That is the standard right now. And they weren't even in the ballpark. And it's such a sad end to the X-Men series at Fox because it really did create this comic book movie world that we live in. Comic book movies own the box office. They own the movie exhibition business. And a lot of that is thanks to the X-Men series. And to see it die like this, so sad and pathetic. It's like watching a slow motion car crash, the last couple of X-Men movies. I mean, you literally could talk to anybody who follows the box office and be like, these are terrible ideas. But inside the Fox studios, they thought, we know better. And they did not. And that's why they got acquired by Disney. Okay, so that was Dark Phoenix, $65 million total this summer. Huge flop. Then we had Late Night. So Late Night's kind of in the same camp as Booksmart. Art house film, did really well at Sundance. Tons of buzz at Sundance. And this was acquired by Amazon for $15 million. They spent $30 million to market this domestically, which is a pretty hefty sum for a movie like this. Now, the average movie, you're going to talk about $50 million for a wide release, $60 million really for a wide release, just marketing spend domestically, US and Canada. Here with Late Night, they spent $30 million, $15 million to acquire, so you're $45 million in the hole to start out with. It won't have an international audience. Comedies tend to be very culturally centric. They only play in the country where they're really from. So it wasn't going to play well in like Italy or like Brazil. You just have the US market. Late Night only made $15 million domestically. So I believe this was a joint release between Amazon and United Artists Releasing. UAR, at it again, ruining films. So $15 million, just to give you perspective, how the game works here is that the studio only gets 50% of the ticket revenues here in the US. Now, there's a lot of nuance to that in some cases, like Disney gets 65% or something up front from the first 2 weekends for big movies, whatever, it doesn't matter. For most movies, 50% domestic ticket gross. So they only made, 8 million dollars from this. That's not going to cut it. They're like massively in the hole for this film. Again, this is the same situation as Booksmart. It's a small art house film. It's very high quality. It's a very good movie. Objectively so. Critics loved it. So there was an audience here for this. If you platform released it, rolled it out to New York and Los Angeles, and did it for a long time though. So here's what happened. Booksmart comes out wide release, comes out strong, falls flat in its face. They see this, and the Late Night distributors are basically like, oh shit, we can't release this wide, because that was the plan, to release it wide right away. They're like, oh, wait a second, we can't do that. So let's play it in New York, Los Angeles for a week, get some good headlines in the New York Times, LA Times, and the USA Today. I think there was an article in the USA Today about how well it did in limited release. So that worked, but then they pushed it wide the weekend afterward. You can't do that. Like for a movie like Late Night, you got to have it play. I would have it play in New York, Los Angeles alone, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. I don't give a shit. Just let it play. Get that buzz from those people. Remember, these are the centers of media and culture. So the social media and all that sort of stuff, if it's sort of, radiating out from those cultural centers in America, there will be recognition in other places in the country. This movie is very good. And then you slowly roll it out. Now, Deadline keeps on talking, platform releases don't. It's not always the best thing for business. People want to make money up front. I get it. But the potential here for Late Night, I think, is easily $30-40 million. For a movie of that high quality, I would say baseline $40 million, or do not release it in theaters. Sell it to a streaming service. Amazon probably doesn't care. They're just going to put it up on Prime as soon as possible. But I think it's another failure for limited releasing. And I think United Artists Releasing had their hand in that one as well. Okay, let's keep moving. This is a big summer. A lot was coming out. Men in Black International from Sony came out that week after. Now we're on the week of June 14th, 2019. A huge flop. Closed out at $79 million domestic. And now we have a pattern. So we have Avengers Endgame, Aladdin, John Wick. They all do very well. Godzilla, Dark Phoenix, and Men in Black over about a 3-week period. A ton riding on those films, all flopped massively. Also on the 14th, Shaft flopped huge. $21 million total domestic. Should have opened at 21 easy. Men in Black should have opened at least 40, closed out at 120 or 150, something up there. And what you just have here is just huge swings and misses. These are huge strikeouts. These are $100 million losses at least. And so that's why this summer, we started out a good lap ahead of the rest of every other summer out there. But what ended up happening here is that Godzilla flopped massively. Dark Phoenix was, I think, the biggest flop of the year, or maybe one of the biggest flops of the decade. And Men in Black flops. These are huge movies that couldn't get anybody to show up to see them in this summer. And this is in June, for Christ's sakes. And this is, I was just reminded that it kind of felt like the 90s. You had these back-to-back big movies. Like, this is going to be crazy. Like, it's going to be like a $5 billion summer. But these movies just collapsed on impact. And, you kind of have to wonder why. And like Deadline has a good write-up on the summer stuff. And their take on it is essentially that you have to have something super edgy, and you can't just rely on old sort of reboots. And the term that everybody uses is IP, intellectual property. I hate that term. As much as this sort of like a business analysis podcast, like the anti-capitalist and anarchist in me is just like, I cannot call these things, I cannot call a past movie intellectual property or a story intellectual property. There's an established audience for a movie like Men in Black. Everybody knows Men in Black. It came out in the 90s. There's 2 sequels to it. Godzilla is one of the biggest sort of monster characters of the last 50 years in the worldwide culture. Dark Phoenix is, there's this built-in audience and awareness for these stories, and people just didn't show up. Deadline has a theory essentially that it wasn't edgy enough, it wasn't new enough, it didn't feel like a spectacle. And I kind of buy into that theory. The thing that I come back to over and over again this year and on this podcast, and especially this summer, is if you want people to show up in the movie theater, you have to create a spectacle. You can create a small spectacle for art house people and sort of arty or cosmopolitan people. That's fine, but it has to feel like a spectacle. And what that means, there has to be something special about it that you're going to spend at least 3 hours of your life. Who has time? Everybody's got like 20 jobs. Someone's working for Uber. They're working for like, they have like 100 jobs just to get, make ends meet now because our economy is absolute trash. So no one has any time. So you're asking somebody to spend 3 hours, maybe 4 of their very valuable time to go see a movie, to pay. And they also have to pay like $15, $20. You got gas. You have to deal with the public. It's a huge barrier of entry to get somebody to go see a movie. I related a lot to getting somebody to vote. Like, you have to hit them 10, 15 times, remind them constantly, this is important, to get someone to act on that level. And Men in Black and Dark Phoenix and Godzilla just didn't meet that threshold. That's essentially what happened. It didn't meet the threshold for action. It didn't meet the threshold to get somebody to say, you know what, this Friday I'm going to treat myself. I'm going to go with my friends. I'm going to spend $15. I'm going to buy my ticket on Fandango, get my assigned seat in my dream lounger to Marcus Theater. It's going to be a great experience. But it's going to be 4 hours of my time. It's going to completely take up my Friday night or Saturday night. It's a big deal to do that. And those movies, at least from their marketing, just did not show that level of excitement for people. It just wasn't there. That's the exact opposite for something like Avengers Endgame, which is, I think, would be the paradigm of the spectacle. People felt like they had to see it. They arranged their lives around seeing it. No one arranged their life around to see Men in Black International. Did not happen. And that's why no one really showed up, and it only made $80 million domestically. So that's a big theme of this summer. It's a very like, it's almost a gilded sort of age at the box office. It's very high and low. You have Disney way at the top, making, upward 50% of the box office this year, $2.5 billion essentially domestically. And then you have all the rest of the studios just clamoring for the scraps at the bottom of the table, right? Okay, let's keep this train moving. Speaking of Disney, so Shaft was a flop. Men in Black was a flop. This is mid-June now. Now June 21st, we have Toy Story 4. Again, Disney. With a grand slam. This one did not open massively comparatively to the other Disney films, but it had great legs. And so it was, I think, tracking to 150 opening weekend domestically, of course, US and Canada. It actually did only like 120, but it ended up doing in total domestically $427 million. Huge win. Now, it's Toy Story. I think the expectation there was that it was going to be massive. I thought it was more like a $500 million film domestically. But then I forget that Aladdin came out like a month before that and did over $300 million domestically. So I think Disney really, in some ways, cannibalized its own audience this summer. Another sort of context to that is, why was Disney so aggressive this summer with pushing Toy Story, Aladdin, Lion King, Avengers Endgame, four of the biggest movies of the year, essentially, coming out in a 3-month period. Why were they doing that? Disney Plus launches in November 12th. That's why. They are front loading a way to get subscribers for their streaming service, which is their long-term content play. They're always going to release movies, but let's be serious. Streaming is the future of home entertainment. And they're launching their own service, so they want these huge movies to premiere over the next, a few months after it launches. I don't think they're going to be on there right away, because I think they're still going to respect kind of like the 7-month, 8-month window from. I don't know if I ever explained that. So when you release a film, you have the 90-day window. The 90-day window is the day it gets released in the movie theater until it premieres on video on demand rental, $3.99, $4.99, $5.99, something like that. And EST to electric sell-through, or a digital copy of the movie, $14.99, $15.99, all the way up to like $19.99 for a digital copy to own. That's the 90-day window. The streaming window is a lot bigger than that. It's a little bit more varied. It's about 7 to 8, sometimes 9 months before a movie goes from theatrical release, the day it premieres in the theater, to when it is available on an SVOD, subscription video on demand. So that would be your HBO Now, your Netflix, anything like that, Stars. It'll be about 7 to 8 months. So I kind of, essentially what Disney is doing is preloading their slate to get subscribers later this year and early next year for their streaming service. So that it's a very smart move. I think it's going to work well for them. And they also completely own the box office this summer. So Toy Story 4, big win there in late June. Child's Play, again, United Artists releasing, only does $29 million. It should have opened at 20, closed out at least 45, 50. I don't know, like the Child's Play thing, is that like a well-known IP with people? I don't know if it is. I mean, for me it is, because I'm a child of the 80s, so I know Chucky very well. But there was movies in the 90s and stuff, Bride of Chucky, stuff like that. I think a botched release. I mean, this could have been a really fun film for a lot of people to go out and see. I think the marketing was way off, and United Artists releasing, I just feel like I'm really slagging on them. But like I have to, like they made so many mistakes this summer and they were so blatant. I just gotta call it out. Like Child's Play, I can't see a film here where they did a great job releasing. I just don't see one. They kind of failed in everything with all their releases, which is pretty sad. Which is one of the reasons why they're kind of bankrupt, or Annapurna is at least. But another horror film came out a few days after Child's Play and did very well. Annabelle Comes Home, Warner Brothers' new line, did $72 million domestically. It's probably still going a little bit here. That's amazing. This is the third Annabelle film, and I also should probably remind you, Annabelle's a prequel to the Conjuring series. So it's just super bizarre how well this is all done. The Conjuring was 2013. I felt like a one-off, really well done genre flick. One of the better haunted house films I've ever seen. But it's not high art. I don't think they had any intention of starting a cinematic universe based off The Conjuring, but it did so well that these other movies have just crushed it. You have Conjuring 2, Conjuring 3 is coming out next year. You have the 3 Annabelle movies. You have Annabelle Creation, and now Annabelle Comes Home. They're not all masterpieces, but they're pretty solid horror genre movies. You also had The Nun last year, which is a total awful film. Do not see it. One of the worst last half hours of a film I've ever seen. That's a little bit hyperbole, but I'm prone to that. Whatever. Also, La Llorona, which almost opened this summer. Kind of, I guess it was, April, March, something like that. That did pretty well. That was loosely related to the Conjuring universe. But Annabelle Comes Home, kind of under the radar, just crushes $72 million. Versus Child's Play, which I thought had a much splashier release, only just $29 million. So there's just a huge discrepancy here between two very similar products performing very differently. One with, I think, a lot more buzz to it, and then Annabelle just sort of like quietly making $72 million. Like they understand the business very well, especially the horror movie business. Okay, so that was June 26th. Let's keep this thing going. Yesterday, I called this. I noticed I was home the week before this came out, and I saw a commercial for Yesterday, and I was like, this movie's going to break out. And I knew that because the marketing was done in such a way that was really unorthodox. Essentially, so what is this movie all about? This is a movie about a guy who wakes up and he realizes he's the only guy who remembers or is aware that the Beatles ever existed, and everybody else has forgotten about the Beatles. So a very bizarre premise, especially for a wide release. How do you describe that to the average movie-going person in the US and Canada? It's very tough. So what they said, screw it. We're not going to try and explain it to people. We're just going to play up the Beatles angle and say there's tons of Beatles music in this. And like they did a commercial. The thing that really tipped me off, they just like did a commercial that was like interviewing random people. Of course, they're all pre-selected, whatever. It's all fake. But it looks like an interview. And they're like, hey, do you like the Beatles? And they're like, yeah, I love the Beatles. Well, you should check out this movie. And it was like, what is this, the 1970s? But it felt kind of like a throwback, but also very innovative at the same time, because they got people to associate the movie solely with the music. They didn't even try to tell you what the plot was about, because the plot doesn't matter. You're going to see this movie to hear the Beatles music. And it worked really well. $72 million domestically this summer. A huge win for a small film from Universal. Did a great job there in the marketing. So that brings us to July. Spider-Man Far From Home, $381 million domestically. Now there's tons of drama about this. This movie was produced by MCU, Marvel, Disney, Kevin Feige, the Grandmaster himself of the MCU. They've had a little breakup here in the last few weeks. He's no longer going to produce the new Spider-Man movies. But this has done so well, along with Venom and along with Homecoming. Spider-Man Homecoming, what was that, 2 years ago? 3 years ago, maybe? I think 2 years ago. That Sony has created its own cinematic universe on the side. It's like the cousin to the MCU. It's the Sony Marvel cinematic universe with Spider-Man and Venom right now. And you know what? More power to them. Like they've really, I don't know how Venom did that well. It makes zero sense to me. That movie is just like, It's an absolute train wreck of a movie, but it's a lot of fun. But it's not a good movie. I don't think it's even close to an MCU quality film. Though those tend to have a little sort of cookie cutter factory feel to them. They all kind of have the same branding and same sort of pacing and stuff like that. Venom just felt like totally off the cuff, crazy. But Sony has created their own little cinematic universe. It's kind of amazing that they've done that. They basically said "fuck you" to Marvel and Disney. I think Marvel wanted like a 50% co-financing deal with the next Spider-Man movie, and so it's like, no, hell no, we want it all for ourselves. And with this performance of Far From Home, it makes sense to me. Like, it seems like they have the Spider-Man, who's the guy, Tom Holland, I think. They got him locked down. They got the Venom thing going. Woody Harrelson, I think, is going to be the next Venom film. He kind of showed up at the end of the last one. I think they got something good cooking. And I think that's great. I think MCU needs the competition, and I think it'll be interesting to see what they do with Spider-Man and Venom. Also on the this July 4th slot here of the summer, we had Midsummer, perfect open time to open that movie, from A24. This is Ari Aster's second film. His first film was Hereditary, which really popped off last summer and did $44 million domestically. This is A24. A24 is kind of like Annapurna, an upstart, very arty. A24 almost has its own house style at this point. Like, you see an A24 trailer, like, oh yeah, it's definitely A24 material. Midsummer, I think Deadline, when in their write-up, said this is pretty good. I don't think this is good. $26 million domestically. Now, if this was a $5 million art house film with nothing backing it and did $26 million, yeah, it's pretty good. I think Hereditary was a huge win. I don't know how that made $40 million domestically. It had like a D, I think, D+ cinema score. People hated that movie when they saw it. The general audience hated it. These are films for the letterboxed crowd. Film nerds, film snobs, art students, that crew who goes to see foreign films for fun. That's the Midsummer audience. They showed up. I showed up. I despite the fact that I have this podcast, I actually don't go to that many movies at the movie theater. I kind of hate it a lot of the times. I only go when like nobody else is there. I went to go see this opening weekend. I had to. It's an absolutely ridiculous film. I mean, it's just one of the most bonkers things I've ever seen in a movie theater in my entire life, by far. It's even crazier than some of like the just really graphic off the wall horror stuff from the 70s and 80s. It's crazier than that. So maybe on the one hand, the $26 million is like a win, but there's huge buzz behind this. This should have been a way to catapult A24 and Ari Aster to the next level, kind of in the way that Jordan Peele had Get Out, and then Us, just like, it was just a huge, he's now this like A-list horror movie director. That's not going to happen to Ari Aster. He's going to stay in the art house world, which is okay, but that was not the intention with this film. The intention here was to really get a much bigger group of people to see it, and that didn't happen. So I kind of see it as a loss. Later in July 12th, we had 3 new openings. We had Crawl, Stuber, and The Farewell, 3 very different movies. Crawl underperformed. $38 million total domestically. It's from Paramount. It's Paramount's Terror Summer, off like 44% versus last year. I think last year they had Mission Impossible, though. Crawl it was a good film. It kind of looked like a throwaway monster genre flick, but it turned out to be really good. I think Paramount put all their eggs in sort of marketing it in the Southeast, and it just did not have enough awareness in the rest of the country and Canada. So I think it's one of the reasons it was kind of depressed. They didn't really put a full marketing arm behind it, and that's why it only made 38. I think it could have easily made 58 with a bigger marketing push, because it is a pretty good movie. Stuber is kind of like the castaway from the Fox Disney merger. At least that was the excuse on why they didn't market it as much. Only $22 million domestically. That's so bad. No one knew how to market this thing. It didn't look very good. I think it was abandoned by Disney essentially. And they're like, this isn't going to do anything. We still have to release it, but we're not going to back it and pour any more money into it. The Farewell, I think one of the bigger stories of the year. A very niche, I would say, A24 art house release, does $14 million. Platformed out, it's still making money. It's going to have a lot of awards contention, I believe, for that one. I think that's a big win for that type of film. And then we hit sort of the end of July. You have The Lion King, which, obviously it's Disney reigning king over the summer. The Lion King was a sure bet, grand slam. It's made over $500 million domestically, 515 to be exact right now. The reaction to it was not great, but it doesn't matter because Lion King is one of the most beloved films of all time. It is like injecting nostalgia to release that film, like mainlining nostalgia. So it's not surprising that it did $500 million. I do say that the reaction to it was really poor. Some people loved it. I mean, if it made $500,000, a lot of people, obviously had to go see it multiple times. I don't know anybody who saw it who liked it. It seemed really kind of a strange way to remake that movie. It essentially was the same movie with the same songs and kind of the same script, just with a different sort of skin on it. And like the way the animals looked was bizarre. It had that uncanny valley situation going on where the animals were singing and dancing, but they looked like real lions. And so it didn't work for a lot of people. It didn't work for me. But it made $500 million. So it's a huge win and sort of continued Disney. I mean, Disney really kind of did save this summer. I mean, you can make that argument, right? Like Disney had, Lion King, Toy Story, Aladdin, and Endgame essentially made this summer. The big question that I have, and this is like the sort of almost like a business theory question, is did people save their money to see those movies and not spend their money on other studios' films? Is that what happened? Because then you can make the argument that like we only had $4.7 billion to spend this summer as consumers, and we decided to spend it on Disney. But there's another argument that said they basically suppressed, in a way, the box office because people went to go see those films instead of these other films, and it was just sort of like they kind of sucked the oxygen out of the business a little bit. I don't know. Maybe there was a lot more potential for this summer to do better. Maybe more people show up to see Godzilla and Dark Phoenix and Men in Black International if they didn't already spend, $30 to see Endgame or whatever it cost to see an opening weekend. And then they went to go see Aladdin. And maybe this, I don't know. I don't know what argument I'm trying to make. But I can see it both ways. I can see like Disney might have saved the summer, but Disney also might have suppressed the summer in a way. And so Lion King, obviously a huge win. Continuing on in July, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, big win for Sony and Quentin Tarantino. I was very surprised by this performance. I did not think anybody was going to show up for this. Opened at $40 million. Now it sits at 126. And we start to talk about these movies. A lot of these movies are still out. Like it's August 31st when I'm recording this. A lot of these are still in the theater. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, 126 so far domestically. Just started to make some real decent money overseas now. It was kind of an American only release for a couple of weeks. But that was a big surprise. I mean, one of the only movies, maybe the only original sort of story you could say that made over $100 million this summer. I think that's true. Yeah, because I don't see anything else that made $100 million. Rocket Man was close. Okay, so that was the end of July. Then we go into the summer. Summer's the gutters. August. August is the gutter slot. Sorry, it's like late, and I usually don't record at night, so like I'm all over the place. But I think it's kind of fun. I'm a little more loopy, a little more free flowing with my analysis. So then we're into August, the gutter slot of summer. It's part of summer, but it makes a lot less money than June, July usually. We have some pretty interesting films come out. Scary Stories to Tell in Dark now sits at $53 million. I think that's a big win for that movie. It was actually pretty good. Lionsgate put it out. The trailer was terrible. That's a really good series of books to adapt to film. They threw it out in August to see what happened. I think it's done quite well for its situation. Dora and the Lost City has only made $46 million. That's a flop. Again, Paramount. It's like nothing but misses this summer besides Rocketman, which I think is kind of a win. Art of Racing in the Rain from Fox did $22 million. Not very good. Kind of like a Dog's Purpose level. Been there, done that. I forgot it is another dog's film. Another dog film. The Kitchen, huge flop. $11 million. That was a serious film. Tiffany Haddish, Melissa McCarthy. Nobody wanted to see that. I think that sat on the shelf for a good 6 months, 8 months, something like that. Just not a good conception of the product there, and not a good release at all. They dumped it essentially in August. Angry Birds movie 2 has done $30 million so far. That's a loss. Good Boys is kind of a win. Universal rated R. Seth Rogen. Kind of a raunchy comedy with like young teenage boys. $49 million so far for that one. That's a good performance of that movie. 47 Meters Down, which I regrettably saw on my birthday this year. $17 million total. I had a good time seeing it, but it's an absolutely terrible movie. And then we're closing out the summer. Ready or Not, Angel Has Fallen, Overcomer. Ready or Not's done $16 million so far. Angel Has Fallen. These are not weekend numbers. Like, these are not updated to like today. It was just Saturday. So these will probably be a little bit higher when the numbers come in tomorrow for Sunday. Angel Has Fallen has done 32 so far. That one's a pretty good movie, actually. It's not that bad. It's kind of fun. Well, I shouldn't say that. The first half hour is good. The rest of it's pretty terrible. But it's what do you expect? It's the Has Fallen series. So that's a rundown of the whole summer. So let's take a huge step back and just kind of think about what happened. To give you sort of the high level review of this summer, we started out insanely strong, right? The normal last week of April is $190 million total box office. That's the average over the last 10 years, adjusted for inflation, just for you. $190 million. We did 536 this year because of Avengers Endgame. So again, we had like, it's not even like a lap head start. We had like a 2-lap head start with this summer. Then essentially what happens is things start to falter pretty immediately. Aladdin does well. Through May, we're doing okay through May. You know, down 3% the third week of May, down 14% the fourth week of May. So not great, kind of even. Then what really happens is June falls apart. That's when we had the Men in Black flop, Godzilla flop. Godzilla wasn't even the number one movie that weekend, by the way. Godzilla flop and Dark Phoenix flop. So, the second week of June, which is usually a huge week for the summer movie season. Usually it's 6% of the entire summer movie season. That's average over the last 10 years. It was only 4% of the total this year, down 32% versus the 10-year average. So normally in that week in the summer, it does $303 million. We only did $205 this year because of the flop of Men in Black and Godzilla. So June was rough. We were down 6% the week after, 8%, and down 35% the July 12th weekend, which is the 28th week of the year. Normally the average for that week is $315 million at the box office over the last 10 years. We only did 202. And that was, I believe, the second week of Spider-Man. So July was tough too. Then Lion King comes out and everything kind of adjusts a little bit for the better. We were up 30% that week versus a normal week over the last 10 years. We did 390. The normal's 304. So essentially about 30% increase. And then August, the end of July through August is all down. Not a lot of up, as you can tell. So essentially what happened here is we had such a head start, and the rest of the summer was essentially flop after flop after flop. With there were some victories, right? But we were down pretty bad the rest of the summer versus an average summer over the last 10 years. That Avengers Endgame is the main reason why this summer stayed even with the average of the last 10. We did about 4.7. Again, this is through last weekend. That's why I cut off summer. 4.7 billion this year. The average of the last 10 years over that same time period, 4.75. And we were 4.73. So kind of right on the money there. But we were so front loaded this year that we had so many down weeks later in the year, that it's kind of a weird. If you just looked at that number, oh, we're even, things are good. They're not. I don't think they're that good. I think that the Godzilla, Men in Black, Dark Phoenix trio of flops is very concerning for the business. Those are massive films with a known story, kind of a built-in audience, and they could not get people to show up. I mean, the Dark Phoenix thing kind of is a little bit of an outlier. They never should have been made. Men in Black as well kind of feels like, why are you doing another movie? It's kind of a reboot with new characters, but still, the real bad one is the Godzilla King of Monsters, because I think they had like a $200 million production budget, and it was part of a bigger cinematic universe, and it just it hit a brick wall, just rammed right into it at 100 miles an hour. So I think, that's one of the reasons why this summer it's a tale of two summers, the start and the rest of it. Avengers Endgame and the rest of the summer. That's essentially what happened. And then, it brings up the sort of domination of Disney, right? We really have to focus on that, because they're going to be so powerful once Disney Plus launches on November 12th. They're going to have so much sway. They have the Star Wars movie coming out later. It's the end of that, the new trilogy. And so, you do have to wonder how that's going to affect the business overall. They sucked up half of the box office this summer. Is that going to have a negative effect? Did it already have a negative effect at the box office? And I say that because I'm the champion of films like Booksmart. I'm a champion of a film like Late Night. As much as I love streaming, I also love the movie theater experience, and I think I want it to stay around for forever. I fell in love with it as a kid, and I've always loved it. It's why I do this podcast. I had even though Midsummer was a train wreck of a movie and I didn't really like it that much, I had a blast seeing it in the theater. I had a blast seeing 47 Meters Down, which is one of the worst movies I've seen in the theater. I had a blast watching it in the theater because I was in the theater. And so there's something special with the theater experience, right? But I don't want it to be dominated by, and I've always been a little bit on the negative side with comic book movies. It's just a chip on our shoulder I have about that. I know a lot of people out there love the MCU and stuff like that, and I respect that. And I respect the DCU and respect what they're doing. I respect the power of those franchises and those audiences. My concern is that interesting stories that don't fall into that cookie cutter model are getting smothered. Booksmart and Late Night, I can 100% I can blame Annapurna on that, right? On some level. But on another hand, here are two really good movies that are interesting, that are original, that are arty on some level, but artistically rich is what I mean. Really engaging stories that could not get an audience at the movie theater. And my concern there is that what's going to happen to those films next year and then the year after? What happens if Disney gains more share and puts out more movies like Lion King this year, which is a terrible film, a completely needless, mindless product that they put out just to have people consume and then throw out the next day in their mind. That's concerning to me, because that's not a healthy business model. It's just not, to have one company dominate so much. And people think, oh, well, it's Disney. I love Disney. And I love MCU. I love this sort of stuff. There's nothing wrong with loving what they put out. There is a problem with their effect on the industry at large, where smaller movies, and you can see this in the deals that they're making with movie studios, they're forcing, even mom and pop theaters, they're forcing them to give them 65% of ticket sales in the first couple of weeks. I mean, they're just, and before you know it, they'll overturn. If you're not aware of this, there's a reason why movie studios cannot own movie theaters. There was an antitrust case against Paramount back, I want to say the, 40s, 50s, maybe, something like that, that basically outlawed a movie studio from owning a movie theater because of anti-competitive practices. They basically were forcing theaters to buy lots of films, Like they'd sell them 5 films, and so you have to play all of these. It basically price fixing, conspiracy, all of that stuff, monopolies. The really, really dark side of capitalism. If the industry is not careful, Disney does not give a shit. They don't give a shit about artistic expression. They don't give a shit about diversity at the box office. They exist to do what? Make as much money as possible and increase their shareholders' wealth. That's why they exist. That's why every corporation exists. And sure, there's some really good people in corporations, but essentially it's in the DNA of a corporation to maximize profit and eliminate waste and eliminate competition. And one of the reasons why we have antitrust laws in this country is to prevent from monopolies from happening, because we've seen it happen so many times in this country alone, where a company, Standard Oil, AT&T, Microsoft, where they gain too much control and then they smother innovation, they smother revenue for other companies, and then they end up having, the potential of price fixing and increasing prices for customers becomes a reality. That is what happens when you have a monopoly. They increase prices for the consumer. That's every single time that happens, because that's the nature of capitalism and that's the nature of corporatism. And unless we change our society in the way that we organize it, that's what's going to happen with Disney. The more power they have, the less it's going to enrich consumers and the more they're going to take for themselves. And I think the Lion King movie is a perfect example of that. That was a cash-in. That's not a good movie. It was poorly done. It was shoddy. It was not a high-quality product overall. It certainly was not artistically rich in any way. And that's what you're going to get over and over and over again if Disney gains more control and more power over the industry. And that's just reality. The acquisition of Fox was massive. The launch of Disney Plus is going to be big. And I think it's just, to me, it's just like a warning, because as a society and a country, and I'm getting really sort of soapboxy, this has happened in the past so many different times. And it's clear what's happening with Disney. They're on the path of a Standard Oil. They're on the path of, Paramount and the big studios when they basically got broken up by the U.S. government. They're on the similar path. And it doesn't help interesting voices in the art of cinema. It just doesn't help at all. At the end of the day, it's going to hinder them from getting their voices heard at the movie theater. And that's not good. And I don't think it's good from an artistic and cultural perspective. And I think it's a terrible thing from a business perspective in the box office at large. In any event, that's my preacher moment against Disney. And I have nothing personally against Disney. I think they make a lot of really great films. I'm very concerned that they're going to have way too much power and start hurting the business and kind of suppressing diverse voices at the movie theater, which is never good. Anyway, so that's the summer show. Crazy summer. Looked really average, but it absolutely was not an average summer in any way. And so we'll see what happens here with the fall. I mean, how do I think the fall's going to do this year? It seems pretty strong. I was going through the schedule, and I might do a fall movie preview to kick things off maybe in a week or so. But it's going to be big. It 2's coming out next weekend. That should be pretty massive. I think it's going to open over 100 million pretty easily. Then the rest of the fall, the Goldfinch, Hustler's also coming out. So it's a stronger September than normal, mostly because of it. And October's pretty light though. November is completely stacked. I went through the November list and I was like, this is pure insanity and it's going to be awesome. I think essentially what's happening is you have the high season of the box office is obviously the summer, but then you have these little 2 pockets of like kind of blockbuster, like mini windows or like sort of smaller seasons or off seasons that are strong. The March time frame is really big now. It's almost like Valentine's Day through the end of March is another blockbuster season with Easter and the holidays and spring break. And then also sort of the Thanksgiving, Christmas holiday, November through December is also very strong. So it kind of goes up and down, but of course summer's still the peak of the season. In any event, thanks for listening, guys. I really appreciate you guys listening. If you have any comments, shoot something on YouTube video. The comments, it's the only thing I look at, or shoot me a note on Twitter. In any event, thank you, and I'll be back next weekend with a review of how it did at the box office.